At a motel in South Korea, the sound of banging occasionally emanated from one of the rooms. The motel owner, after receiving complaints from other guests, rushed to intervene. He knocked repeatedly, but there was no response from inside. As he was about to open the door, a call was made to the police. It turned out the motel owner had been murdered. It being the weekend, Detective Hayang, who was playing baseball, rushed to the scene still in his uniform. The victim had a fatal wound and was covered with a duvet. The guest who reported the incident stated that the body was already covered when they found it, and they didn't know who had placed the duvet there. Downstairs, officers were reviewing the security footage. The footage showed that after the motel owner entered the room, no one else had exited. Suspecting the killer might still be inside, Hayang searched the room thoroughly. Finally, he discovered a blood-soaked individual trembling under the bed. Logically, this person was the murderer, but he only admitted to covering the body with the duvet and claimed no memory of the killing itself. He said it was like he had just woken up from a strange dream. Hayang searched high and low but couldn't find the murder weapon. The suspect then casually mentioned he was very thirsty. At that moment, something clicked for Hayang. He checked the suspect's mouth, finding it full of blood. It turned out the motel owner had been bitten to death. As a horrified Hayang recoiled, the killer remained remarkably calm. He explained that he had taken a pill and started feeling unwell. The person who gave him the pill was a Special Forces police trainee. After taking the suspect into custody, Hayang immediately called to inquire about the pill. He called Hioju, the training instructor for the Special Forces police trainees and the teacher of all the Special Forces recruits. She and Hayang were high school classmates and good friends. Back then, Hayang was a talented baseball player, but an injury forced him to abandon his athletic career. One day, he sat alone on the rooftop drinking, leading people to believe he was contemplating suicide. The police quickly arrived on the scene and set up emergency measures below. Finding the situation amusing, Hayang decided to mess with the police, as he single-handedly caused the entire school to stay late. Hioju, the prettiest girl in school, woke up from a nap and discovered Hayang hadn't jumped yet. Ignoring the negotiators, she ran out of class and boldly sat next to Hayang. After a brief, friendly chat, she stood up, pulled Hayang to his feet, and pushed him off the roof. In the moments before impact, Hayang felt a jolt and heard a whooshing sound. As he landed on the inflatable rescue cushion, the first thing he did was confess his feelings to Hioju, the very person who had just pushed him. That was the story of how Hayang and Hioju first met. Years later, Hayang became a local crime detective. Hioju, though intelligent and agile, was overly curious and meddlesome, a trait she couldn't seem to shake. Because of this, she was still working as a Special Forces police trainer, with few opportunities for fieldwork, a fact she often lamented. This time, she received information from Hayang. Her student, Jeon-suk, was a murder suspect. Hioju was thrilled. Wasn't this the perfect opportunity for a promotion? She rushed to find Jeon-suk. But upon arriving at the training room, a bizarre scene unfolded. She found him in a crazed state, on top of another officer. Initially, she thought they were engaged in some sort of inappropriate behavior, but then she realized Jeon-suk was biting his colleague. Seeing this, Hioju quickly intervened to rescue the officer. Jeon-suk, however, turned his attention to her, lunging with teeth and claws. Left with no other choice, Hioju shot Jeon-suk in the leg to stop him. But he continued to advance as if unaffected. She scrambled out of the training room and locked the door. After a period of frantic yelling from inside, Jeon-suk seemed to lose all his energy and collapsed. After regaining his senses, the suspect pleaded with Hioju to call an ambulance, no longer showing any of his previous aggression. Later, while composing herself in the restroom, Hioju discovered a bite mark on her hand from Jeon-suk. This discovery filled her with anxiety. Just then, a bespectacled man accompanied by several personnel in hazmat suits appeared and ordered Hioju to be taken for examination. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel Han Yuzin of the Major Crisis Response Bureau. There had been several recent cases of people exhibiting similar crazed behavior. The condition appeared to be contagious, so Hioju needed to be quarantined in a conference room. He told Hayang that this strange illness was caused by a brain-affecting bacteria that could be transmitted through scratches or bites. When Hyang-sik mentioned that the infected individual had taken a pill before becoming ill, Han dismissed it, telling Hyang-sik to focus on finding the pill first. Hyang-sik rushed back to the crime scene. After a thorough search, he finally found a suspicious pill. He took it to a friend who was knowledgeable in physiology, kinesiology, and computer science, and had some background in pharmaceuticals. After examining it, the friend determined there was nothing wrong with the pill itself, as the batch number indicated it was produced through official channels. Meanwhile, Hioju had been transported to an abandoned school, repurposed by the military as a temporary research facility. Upon arrival, she underwent a series of tests and was then isolated in a private room. Hioju noticed something was amiss. There were numerous patched-up marks on the walls and bloodstains in circular patterns. Furthermore, she could occasionally hear loud banging coming from the adjacent room. It turned out the entire building was a quarantine facility for those infected. The next morning, Hioju's test results came back negative. Fortunately, she showed no signs of infection. Hioju initially planned to use the quarantine as an opportunity for a few days of rest, but she was soon roused for further blood tests. While walking down the hallway, an open door caught her attention. She quickly entered and locked the door behind her. The person confined inside was her trainee, Jeon-suk. Upon closer inspection, he was sitting in a wheelchair, his face completely covered, presumably to prevent him from biting. She tried to question him about the source of the pill that caused his condition, but he wouldn't answer, only repeating the word different before closing his eyes. She tried to approach him for further observation, but thankfully, security arrived just in time. One guard restrained Jeon-suk while the other repeatedly used a taser. After prolonged exposure to the shocks, Jeon-suk gradually lost consciousness. Hioju noticed a surveillance camera in the corner of the room. She surmised this was Lieutenant Colonel Han's doing. Han didn't deny it. He wanted to use this opportunity to observe the infected in their agitated state. He could now confirm that before an outbreak, the infected experienced intense thirst. Hioju didn't blame him, even adding her own observation that the infected also had a significantly slower heart rate. Not only was their pain perception reduced, but their wound healing was also accelerated. Lieutenant Colonel Han nodded. If this could be thoroughly researched, it could greatly enhance the military's combat capabilities, which was the primary goal of his research. Hioju noticed the low temperature in all the rooms. Lieutenant Colonel Han explained that the cold effectively suppressed the bacteria's activity. Looking at the bottle of water beside her, Hyang-sik knew she had passed the test and wasn't exhibiting any other symptoms of infection. Lieutenant Colonel Han then informed her she could return home, provided she attended regular checkups. Suddenly, a bold idea struck Hioju. If she wasn't infected, it meant she possessed antibodies. Wouldn't she be the perfect research subject? She proposed to assist with the research on the condition that Lieutenant Colonel Han give her the highest possible score on her annual review. This would allow Hioju to qualify for subsidized housing from her department. Lieutenant Colonel Han considered for a moment, then agreed to the deal. As Hioju was leaving, he called out, "Do you have a boyfriend?" He explained that newlyweds had a slightly higher chance of securing subsidized housing. Hioju had barely left the office when she ran into Hyang-sik, who was delivering the pill. She was curious about his presence there. It turned out that Hyang-sik's friend had traced the pill's origins. The pill Hyang-sik found was a type of pneumonia medication, which, however, could cause hallucinations and, in severe cases, rabies-like symptoms. Consequently, its production had been halted years ago. Believing this was a crucial clue, Hyang-sik decided to give the pill to Lieutenant Colonel Han for further investigation. However, Han, seemingly having already investigated, showed little interest. Unfazed, Hyang-sik left the office after handing over the pill. Despite waiting for Hyang-sik, Hioju immediately asked him, "Do you have a girlfriend?" Upon receiving a negative response, she declared, "Let's get married." Hyang-sik instantly recalled her rejecting him back in school. She simply stated, "I changed my mind." Since the biting incident at the motel, similar incidents had been occurring throughout the city. Lieutenant Colonel Han, heading the Major Disaster Safety Agency, was tasked with apprehending the infected and managing related operations. The aftermath at each crime scene was gruesome. At a homeless shelter, there were over 10 fatalities. Speculation ran rampant. The public referred to this crazed biting phenomenon, similar to rabies, as the zombie disease. However, the government suppressed all related reports, and the true severity of the outbreak remained unknown. Some newspaper reporters even offered bribes for insider information. Both Hioju and her colleague, Kim, received such offers but refused. They wouldn't compromise their integrity for money. Besides, Hioju had more important matters to attend to. She had secured the apartment, thanks to the preferential treatment. Lieutenant Colonel Han had given her the highest possible evaluation. Initially, she wouldn't have qualified, but luckily, she had Hayang sick. Hioju had proposed marriage on the spot. The man she once rejected didn't retaliate, but happily accepted her proposal. This secured Hioju the subsidized apartment she desired. It was her first time living in such an upscale residential complex. Hioju took charge of decorating, thrilled with her new home. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Han approached Hayang sick, hoping he would help investigate the pneumonia medication. The drug had been banned years ago, so why was it still circulating? Lieutenant Colonel Han had a plan. Hayang sick and Hioju would pose as buyers to lure out the seller. Meanwhile, Hioju, having just finished exercising outside her complex, was about to head home when she received a call from her colleague, Kim. He had been scratched by an infected person, and the wound wasn't healing. Upon hearing this, Hioju immediately drove him to the Disaster Safety Agency's temporary facility. Due to her regular checkups, she had temporary access. The medical officer examined Kim's wound, noting that it was fresh and didn't resemble a scratch. Nevertheless, he took a sample for testing. Before leaving, he couldn't resist flirting with Hioju. Next, it was Hioju's turn for her blood test. The medical officer informed her that a bite from an infected individual guaranteed infection. A scratch might offer a chance of escape, but over time, the infected became increasingly frenzied until they completely lost their minds. And as of now, there was no effective treatment. After their conversation, the two returned to the waiting room, but Kim was gone. Hioju immediately called him. It turned out Kim had changed into his work clothes and snuck away. He didn't explain his reasons clearly, only telling Hioju he'd figured out a way to make a lot of money for his family before he died. In reality, during the previous incident with Jian, while saving another trainee from being bitten, Kim had received a scratch himself. He'd heard the other trainee later succumb to the zombie disease and was taken to the Disaster Safety Agency's quarantine, never to be seen again. Fearing a similar fate, Kim kept his injury a secret. Then, a reporter contacted him, offering a hefty sum for information. Desperate to provide for his family before he supposedly succumbed to the disease, Kim decided to take the risk. He planned to infiltrate the Disaster Safety Agency's temporary base, where all infected individuals were quarantined to keep the truth hidden. To avoid suspicion about the bite mark, he cut his own hand with a blade, feigning a scratch from an infected person. He then called Hioju for help, gaining easy access to the facility. Hioju, guessing Kim's intentions, immediately asked the medical officer where the critically infected were kept. The officer, left with no choice, revealed the truth. They were being held in refrigerated trucks. Hioju stared in disbelief. They were treating people like that? Meanwhile, Kim, having followed the medical officer, reached the truck area. He stealthily opened a truck door and slipped inside. The scene inside was horrifying. Rows of beds lined both sides, each occupied by a patient, some even chained. Even more disturbing, the temperature was just 4 degrees Celsius. This wasn't a place for humans. Just then, someone passed by outside and noticed the open door, promptly locking it. Kim was now in serious trouble. Staying inside meant freezing to death. And then there was the other, more terrifying threat to consider. Elsewhere, Hayang sick and Lieutenant Colonel Han were making progress. They had successfully contacted the pill sellers. Their apprehension seemed straightforward. Hayang sick took them down with a few punches. But when he opened their trunk, he discovered, to his horror, that the dealers were transporting infected individuals. Lieutenant Colonel Han, seemingly desensitized to the situation, calmly shot them dead, while Hayang sick struggled to process what he was witnessing. How could he shoot people? But Han retorted, "They're not people anymore." Suddenly, he received a call reporting the incident at the base. He immediately took Hayang sick back with him. By now, Hioju and a large police contingent had arrived at the truck area. She received a call from Kim, but when she tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. However, the medical officer heard the faint ringing and realized Kim was inside the truck. As they opened the door, a multitude of hands reached out. They were all infected, devoid of reason. The police struggled to slam the door shut. Hayang saw a now infected Kim through the crack. Ignoring the danger, Hioju pushed past the officers and entered the truck, using a crowbar to hold back the infected while trying to rescue her colleague. But she had underestimated their strength. She became trapped herself. The officers outside, instead of helping, prepared to close the door, leaving Hioju inside. Luckily, Hayang arrived just in time. He used all his strength to pull Hioju out, even as she refused to let go of her colleague. Finally, they all escaped the truck. Kim, clearly infected, was immediately restrained. As Hayang grabbed a grenade from an officer and tossed it into the truck, the chaotic situation was finally resolved. Hioju looked at the man before her, a warrior, and felt a surge of emotion. Her rescued, but infected, colleague was taken away for quarantine and treatment. Right now, he was filled with regret. If something happened to him, what would become of his wife and children? The quarantine of the infected individuals in the truck had been revealed on television. No one expected the zombie virus to appear before the public in this way. That evening, Hioju heard noises from upstairs again. She immediately ran up to investigate. Seeing bloodstains on the sleeve of the man with glasses, she barged into his apartment to confirm her suspicions. Just then, a noise came from the bathroom. Knowing he couldn't hide it any longer, the man with glasses confessed his wife had started feeling ill 2 days prior, and her mental state had become very erratic. Hioju cautiously opened the door to see if the person inside was infected. Unexpectedly, the man with glasses suddenly shoved her into the room. An infected woman with blank, white eyes and a vacant expression was slowly approaching. Hioju quickly retreated into the bathroom, trembling and watching in fear. Fortunately, the infected woman didn't appear as aggressive as others. "Do you want to get out of here?" the woman whispered, her voice filled with confusion. Hioju stealthily moved and quickly opened the door. But when the infected woman saw her husband calling the police outside, she reacted as if she'd seen an enemy and immediately rushed out. This gave Hioju the chance to escape. The infected woman ran past the young neighbor girl without warning, and the girl instantly became the next target. Luckily, Hioju arrived just in time and tried to smother the infected woman's mouth with a pillow. But the infected woman was too strong, quickly pushing Hioju to the ground. At that moment, Hayang stepped out of the elevator. Seeing the scene, he immediately took off his jacket, threw it over the infected woman's head, and finally managed to subdue her. Once the situation calmed down, the man with glasses reappeared, feigning concern and asking if everyone was all right. Without a word, Hayang punched him in the face. The next morning, Lieutenant Han held a press conference officially announcing the truth about the terrifying zombie virus. He confirmed that infected individuals would attempt to bite others and that before the onset of the disease, they would experience extreme thirst. He urged citizens to immediately report anyone showing signs of infection. However, while watching the news, Hioju complained that Lieutenant Han had revealed too little information, especially failing to mention the severely infected. While Hioju was sleeping, Hayang left the apartment and ran into the man with glasses again. Test results showed that the man wasn't infected. Hayang, no longer interested in him, shifted his focus to Lieutenant Han. The man's wife, the infected patient, was strapped to a bed, her eyes blank white, her behavior aggressive. These were typical symptoms of the zombie virus. But strangely, while other infected individuals had moments of lucidity, this patient remained in a constant state of savagery. Medical personnel explained that she was likely dead, only kept animated by the virus. Hearing this, Hayang immediately realized something. He and his colleague brought the test results to the man with glasses' apartment. The results showed that the blood on the baseball bat belonged to his wife. Wood fragments also contained pieces of skull. It turned out that earlier, Hayang had met with a colleague alone, and under pressure, the colleague confessed that the man with glasses had killed his wife so he could be with her. The outcome was predictable. The despicable man finally received his deserved legal punishment. After hearing this, Lieutenant Han immediately sought out Hioju and delivered shocking news. According to the drug dealer, he had sold the zombie pills as weight loss supplements to several residents at the apartment complex's gym. The man with glasses' wife was one of the buyers. The other users were currently fine, only because the virus hadn't yet taken hold. But it was only a matter of time. Now, the only thing they could do was quarantine the entire apartment complex. Meanwhile, the hazmat team arrived and began the lockdown procedures. Lieutenant Han believed Hioju had a strong immunity. She could leave now and avoid quarantine. But Hioju had only moved in a few days ago. She didn't want to abandon the place. She decided to stay with the residents and share their fate. Because the incident hadn't been publicly announced yet, the other residents were still skeptical. They saw the entire complex cordoned off, with only one entry point and seemingly no way out. When Hioju tried to call Hayang Sicko to warn him not to enter, she discovered he was already inside. Seeing him, Hioju ran to embrace him. Now, she wouldn't have to fight alone. According to the news, in addition to their complex, 3 nursing homes and 2 homeless encampments had also been quarantined due to the zombie outbreak. Despair and panic quickly spread throughout the city. The murderer, the man with glasses, initially tried to escape. But in this situation, even with an extra leg, it would be difficult. Ultimately, Hayang Sicko's team apprehended him, handcuffing him to his bed frame. The man with glasses accused Hayang Sicko of violating his human rights, asking what he was supposed to do if he needed to urinate. Hayang Sicko casually produced a wine bottle and told him to figure it out. Hayang Sicko didn't have time to stay. He needed to attend the residents' meeting. This was a mandatory briefing for quarantined residents, organized by security forces building by building. The quarantine period was estimated to be 7 days. Anyone attempting to escape would face severe punishment. Hioju and Hayang Sicko were public servants. They had more important work to do, which was to eliminate the risk of further viral spread. Their primary target was the gym, where the weight loss pills had been distributed. Only one employee was currently there. Hioju looked in the trash can and saw numerous empty water bottles. She realized this employee drank a lot of water. Could this be an early sign of infection? But the employee vehemently denied it, insisting he'd never taken the weight loss pills. As Hayang Sicko tried to question him further, the employee suddenly became agitated. Hioju and Hayang Sicko grew increasingly concerned, so they poured out all the water in the office, leaving the employee in the room to see if he would exhibit symptoms of dehydration. Next, Hioju and Hayang Sicko needed to check on the other residents. This proved to be a difficult task. Some families refused to even open their doors, communicating only through the intercom system. While they were busy within the complex, Lieutenant Han was also occupied at the security center. He was escorting his assistant to a large hospital room containing a single patient, the chairman of the antiviral drug company. The chairman was furious with Lieutenant Han for allowing the virus spread to become a city-wide problem. Lieutenant Han refused to accept responsibility. He had investigated and discovered that the chairman himself had orchestrated the deliberate distribution of the contaminated antiviral drugs into the market. At this point, the chairman dropped the pretense. Upon closer inspection, he suddenly lunged at the person next to him and bit down. He seemed unsatisfied, his blank white eyes seeking another victim among the 2 people in front of him. However, his companion remained remarkably calm, as the chairman was restrained by iron shackles, completely unable to reach them. It turned out he was the first zombie patient. To attract societal attention and accelerate the development of a cure, he had deliberately released the contaminated drugs into the market. For now, they needed to keep him alive. It would be more helpful in completely dismantling the drug distribution network. Moreover, his companion held a high-ranking position and couldn't be casually disposed of in the apartment complex. Hayang Sicko and Hioju finally finished their virus check for the day. In just 1 day, news of the virus had spread like wildfire. The number of quarantined areas had unexpectedly increased by 2, and the virus had even appeared overseas. Some countries had already closed their borders. Hioju was looking forward to receiving her meal box. But when she went downstairs, she discovered the building's main entrance was locked. Because both the first infected individual and the gym were in their building, it had been completely isolated for safety reasons. This infuriated Hioju. She pulled out her colleague's gun, and the reluctant building manager produced the key. He watched as Hioju and Hayang Sicko confidently walked out. However, residents of other buildings still tried to keep their distance, even going so far as to distribute the meal boxes building by building in shifts. With supermarket shelves now empty, the government-provided meal boxes had become essential for survival. Hioju and Hayang delivered meal boxes door to door, but they received little gratitude, even encountering complaints. However, they refused to let such minor incidents dampen their spirits. They purposely went up to the rooftop, where there was ample space and a good view, and sat down to enjoy their lunch. Hioju realized they had an extra meal box. She immediately thought of the gym employee locked in the office. They rushed over, only to find the office deserted. Frustrated, they tried to contact the building manager, but no one answered. Returning to their building, they noticed movement in the hallway of another building. They gave chase, but by the time they reached the elevators, they had lost sight of the person. Hioju spotted a bloodstain on the wall. She immediately had a bad feeling. Suddenly, they heard loud banging from a descending elevator. Hioju and Hayang instinctively retreated, suspecting an infected individual might be inside. Just as they entered their own building, the gym employee also ran in. He had apparently gone to retrieve something from his car, and judging by his state, he didn't seem infected. However, before they could breathe a sigh of relief, a blood-soaked man ran towards them, pounding on the glass doors. Suddenly, and inexplicably, infected individuals began appearing throughout the complex. Hayang immediately went to the building's main hallway, locking the glass doors and preventing anyone from leaving. Thanks to his quick thinking, a pale-eyed infected individual soon arrived. The other residents panicked, screaming. The infected person was the building manager who had locked the doors earlier. No wonder their calls had gone unanswered. At the same time, Hioju received a call from Lieutenant Han. He had seen through the apartment complex's surveillance system that the other buildings had been completely overrun by the zombie outbreak. As time passed, residents from other floors gradually descended, surprised by the scene in the hallway. The outbreak had been so swift that they hadn't yet realized the abnormality within the complex. Hayang patiently explained to everyone that there were zombies outside and that under no circumstances should they leave the building. The bloodstains at the basement door were the best evidence, but since none of the residents had witnessed anything firsthand and had only heard that they couldn't leave the building, they were all starting to get anxious and restless, clamoring to go outside for some air. Hioju couldn't take it anymore and ran to open the glass door. "It's open, just leave," she said. Instantly, everyone went quiet. The perceived safety of numbers seemed preferable to staying inside after all. Hioju retrieved a baseball bat from a locker and then left with Hayang, planning to check the other floors, from the top down to the basement. Hioju didn't see anyone. She guessed that the infected had probably returned to their apartments. Hayang thought this made sense, reasoning that the zombie outbreaks wouldn't be continuous. The infected would regain their senses periodically. When they discovered they were covered in blood, they would surely go home to clean themselves up. Thinking they needed to inform the other residents, Hayang asked the building representative to gather everyone for a meeting. Even the old woman attended. Earlier, the infected doctor's wife had scratched her neck, and the wound was getting worse. It seemed like only a matter of time before she turned. But her family had been ignoring her increasingly erratic behavior, so no one realized there was a zombie in their midst. Hayang and his colleague repeatedly stressed the danger outside and the importance of staying inside the building. But people were still skeptical, especially the arrogant lawyer. He pointedly asked if anyone had actually seen or heard anything with their own eyes and ears. At this point, the shady man in sunglasses stood up to stir the pot. He pulled out his wallet and announced a 3 million won reward for anyone willing to go outside and scout the situation. This troublemaker clearly wanted things to get worse. Soon, hands shot up. They were all cleaning staff from out of town, willing to risk it for the reward money. The building representative still thought Hayang was exaggerating. As she passed the basement, she noticed someone banging on the door, trying to get in. Without thinking, she started to open it, but suddenly noticed a wound on the person's hand. In a blink, he was gone. The woman was still trying to get a better look when a horrifying face appeared in front of her. The next day, Hioju woke up to find Hayang preparing protective gear. It turned out he thought it would be too dangerous for the sanitation workers to go out alone, so he decided to accompany them. Upon learning this, Hioju was furious. Could a little extra hazard pay be worth such a risk? Surprisingly, Hioju was eventually persuaded and decided to go with Hayang Sik. However, before they left, he didn't forget to find the man with glasses to demand his 3 million won bonus. The area now resembled a ghost town, completely deserted. They made a large loop and finally spotted a few figures at the exit gate. One of them was the apartment complex manager. Hioju was slightly surprised because she had seen him infected yesterday, though he seemed to have temporarily regained consciousness. She asked if there were any infected individuals in the area. The manager explained that they had found some earlier, but they had all been quarantined in the library. They were there to receive their lunch boxes, but had been waiting for a long time with no one showing up. It seemed an emergency had occurred outside their small, contained area. This turned out to be true. Lieutenant Colonel Ha was constantly receiving reports of mass infection events breaking out across the city. He had no better method than to order a lockdown wherever a case was discovered. The situation had become extremely serious as the zombie virus directly attacked the brain. Vaccine research was progressing in stages, and they expected an answer within a month. But they didn't know that Lieutenant Colonel Ha had just lied. Only the doctor's assistant knew that all the vaccine test subjects had died. Lieutenant Colonel Ha lied out of desperation. If the higher-ups knew there was no hope for a vaccine, they would surely order the extermination of all infected individuals. With no other option but to tell everyone to leave the area immediately, Hayang Sik was interrupted by Hioju, who suggested they try to stock up on supplies. Therefore, the group headed to the supermarket. The place was also completely deserted. No one cared much anymore, and they started shopping. This was the kind of shopping spree many dreamed of, loading carts without checking prices, not even picking up individual items, but literally wheeling them in. Since the zombie virus had broken out here, all the employees had vanished. However, opportunity and risk always go hand in hand. They quickly discovered bloodstains on the floor. A young man, gathering supplies, followed the trail of blood all the way to the warehouse. Suddenly, he spotted a woman washing her hands. Then she abruptly looked up. The young man realized she was infected. Unfortunately, another zombie suddenly appeared from behind him. Luckily, the masked man arrived just in time, pulling him behind a shelf, temporarily escaping danger. The sanitation worker couple ran over in a panic, saying there were infected inside. Hioju guessed that the noise might attract more zombies, so she led everyone out of the supermarket quickly. Looking at the gnashing, thrashing faces, Hioju couldn't help but worry. Her beloved apartment complex was falling apart. The group pushed their carts, running to the entrance of their building. The resident representative said she wouldn't open the door until she died, demanding they check themselves for injuries. Ever since seeing the infected, she had become extremely paranoid. Suddenly, a horrifying roar and banging echoed. Everyone froze in disbelief. This was the sign of an attack from the infected. Hayang Sik couldn't stay calm anymore. He quickly pulled out his gun, threatening the representative to open the door. But this time, she was even more terrified and refused. Those outside were nearly driven mad with despair. Thankfully, a young girl removed the cleaning rag blocking the door, and everyone was able to enter. After Hayang Sik slammed the door shut, he finally identified the source of the horrific sound. It turned out that the man with glasses had played a recording on his phone. It was a recording of his wife when she was infected. The man with glasses naively thought he could frame Hayang Sik for the commotion and emerge blameless. But his ridiculous trick was quickly exposed, completely enraging Hayang Sik. He smeared blood on the man's face with both hands, telling him it was infected blood. Terrified, the man with glasses collapsed to the floor, screaming. At this point, Hioju ran over, hugging Hayang Sik tightly and comforting him until he gradually calmed down. Unexpectedly, Hioju, usually loud and carefree, had such a tender side. Meanwhile, outside the complex, a large group of protesters demanded the authorities deal with the infected inside, as one had recently escaped. Although security had apprehended the escapee, this wasn't a long-term solution. Unexpectedly, Lieutenant Colonel Ha ordered the release of the captured infected individual, letting them loose on the protesting crowd. Residents within the building gathered. Some suggested escaping the complex. Staying meant inevitable trouble, sooner or later. Hayang Sik immediately objected. It wasn't just the issue of scaling the fence, but also where they would go afterward. The outside could be even more dangerous than within the complex. After this, they resolved to defend the building. As Hayang Sik and Hioju meticulously reviewed their defenses, worried about any breach that might allow the infected in, Hioju suddenly remembered they hadn't secured the building's rooftop. Luckily, they realized this just in time. The masked man was always on the rooftop. Hayang Sik immediately locked the door leading from the rooftop to the hallway, finally feeling a sense of relief. The two looked out at the nightscape in the distance. Hioju was curious about what the other infected were doing. She went to the gym to check on Jong Hyuk, the gym employee who had been in solitary quarantine because all signs pointed to him being infected. Hayang Sik, wanting to avoid panic, had arranged for a colleague to monitor him around the clock. Jong Hyuk was grateful for this and remained obediently in the gym, not daring to step outside. But even though he wasn't looking for trouble, trouble came looking for him. The troublemaker was none other than the despicable man with glasses. After having his face smeared with blood by Hayang Sik, he'd been so scared he'd washed his face for an hour at home. Suddenly, he saw his wife's assistant taking pills and rushed to stop her. His wife had been infected after taking pills. The assistant explained that his wife had been taking health supplements bought from the gym. She wouldn't have taken random medication. Hearing this, the man with glasses, harboring malicious intent, ran to the gym and confronted the handcuffed Jong Hyuk, directly asking if he had sold pills to his wife. However, he wasn't there for revenge, but to purchase some of the virus pills. Naturally, Jong Hyuk denied it. Emboldened by Jong Hyuk's restraints, the man with glasses threw a powerful punch from a distance. Hayang Sik figured a good show was about to begin. And indeed, it wasn't long before the man with glasses met his doom. Infected by Jong Hyuk, he turned into a raging beast, lunging to bite, but his hands were cuffed, rendering him immobile. Hayang Sik told the man with glasses he'd brought this upon himself before reluctantly pulling him away from Jong Hyuk. The man with glasses couldn't understand why Hayang Sik was helping Jong Hyuk conceal his condition. Hayang Sik didn't explain, only threatening him not to reveal anything. But Jong Hyuk's infection couldn't be hidden forever. When the lawyer returned home, he saw someone from another building standing at his front door. The man claimed he needed legal assistance and wanted to meet with the lawyer, who hadn't opened his office in a while. After a moment's thought, he agreed to the meeting. The lawyer's wife, seeing her husband rush out, felt something was amiss. Checking his records, she learned he was meeting someone from another building. She immediately sought Hioju's help. Without a word, Hioju grabbed a baseball bat and headed for the basement. By then, the lawyer had reached the basement door. He was completely unguarded against the strange man, about to open the door. Fortunately, at the crucial moment, Hioju arrived, pulling the lawyer back and blocking the stranger from entering, forcing him to leave, defeated. Clearly, the stranger was an infected individual searching for blood. But the rescued lawyer was ungrateful, even scolding Hioju for chasing away his client. At this point, Hayang Sik stayed with Jong Hyuk until he regained consciousness. Calculating the time, the frenzy lasted 15 minutes. Hayang Sik flipped back the blanket and asked him point blank when he'd taken the pills. The man didn't hide it anymore. Under the immense pressure of the building lockdown, he'd snuck to his car and retrieved some of the pills. He hadn't expected just 2 pills to infect him. The news of a new infection source spread rapidly. The lawyer proposed expelling Jong Hyuk from the building and gathered all the residents for a vote. He first explained the situation from a legal standpoint, citing infectious disease regulations and emergency avoidance clauses. Then he showed everyone the video of Jong Hyuk's infection. 9 residents voted to expel Jong Hyuk, including the building representative. 9 voted against. With the vote tied, a person in a hazmat suit entered. He was a resident from the 15th floor and cast his vote against expulsion. Finally, Jong Hyuk was allowed to stay. However, he would be under 24-hour guard. Hivon, who lived on the 3rd floor, volunteered for the first watch, stating that they were neighbors. Elsewhere, Hioju, out of gratitude, tried to walk the masked man home. Before entering his apartment, he invited her in, mentioning he had delicious food. At the mention of food, Hioju happily entered. However, the young man seemed uneasy as he glanced outside. When Hayang Sik went to Jong Hyuk's room, Jong Hyuk revealed that the resident in the hazmat suit from the 15th floor had previously bought pills from the gym. Upon hearing this, Hayang Sik immediately thought of the many residents who had left with the masked man. So, he rushed to the 15th floor. As the saying goes, misfortunes never come singly. Before this situation could be resolved, a bigger crisis emerged. After retrieving supplies from the supermarket, the masked man realized he had left his phone behind, the one he used to record videos. The young girl reminded him it was by the building entrance. Unwilling to go out alone, he offered her money to retrieve it. Short on cash, she reluctantly accepted. Seeing no one outside, she quietly left the building. But just as she picked up the phone, a strange man appeared beside her. Anyone daring to wander around now was surely infected. Terrified, she backed away. At this moment, Hivon and her brother, who were guarding Jong Hyuk, suddenly heard banging from the hallway. The masked man and the girl had made it back to the building, but before they could close the door, infected individuals, and not just one, had surged inside. Hivon and her brother realized the commotion was coming from the stairwell. Her brother bravely opened the fire door to investigate. Hivon watched in horror as her brother was dragged away. She fled back to the gym, locking the door. Noticing the infected Jong Hyuk's now referred to as Kim Thirst, she made an excuse and ran away. Hayang Sik pursued Kim until he forced him back inside the building. Later, as Hayang Sik decided to check the other floors, suspecting more infected might have entered, Hivon was still reeling from the shock of seeing her brother taken. While handcuffed to a pipe, she pleaded with Kim to release her. Seemingly delirious with fear, Hivon actually threw him the handcuff key. Kim lunged towards the water dispenser, but it did little to quench his thirst. He looked greedily at Hivon's neck. Terrified, she fled into the basement. Not long after, both of them ended up back in the gym. Kim sat listlessly by the water dispenser. Seeing him seemingly lucid, Hayang Sik cautiously approached, intending to recuff him. But Kim suddenly went berserk, attacking Hayang Sik ferociously. Fortunately, Hioju rushed in to save Hayang Sik. Both skilled in close combat, they managed to subdue Kim without much difficulty. Suddenly, gunshots rang out. Kim collapsed. Lieutenant Colonel Ha had arrived. It turned out he was the person Hivon had encountered in the basement. Looking at the dead Kim, Hayang Sik felt a surge of anger. He, too, had a gun but wasn't as cold-blooded as the lieutenant colonel. Hivon, having just endured a terrifying ordeal, was offered water and a sedative by the lieutenant colonel so she could rest. Hioju quickly guessed that Lieutenant Colonel Han was using water to test if Hivon was infected. Han didn't deny it. Remembering her own required periodic testing, Hyasu asked if Han was there to draw her blood. When Hayang Sik accidentally stumbled upon the scene, the janitor and his coworker were hiding. They were incredibly lucky. That morning, they'd seen a zombie wander into the hallway and were frozen in fear, unable to flee. Fortunately, a pastor reacted instinctively, holding out his cross, seemingly performing a miracle that repelled the zombie. This was the first time anyone had heard of a cross repelling a zombie. The two men had narrowly escaped disaster. Lieutenant Colonel Han finished his infection checks and went up to the rooftop. Hayang Sik, also on the rooftop, had several questions for him. Was Hyoju's injury dangerous? Were there any other cases of someone recovering after being scratched by an infected person? Han revealed there were 4 such cases, but apart from Hioju, all eventually succumbed to the infection. Hayang Sik was deeply worried. In a meeting, Lieutenant Colonel Han announced that the complex would lose power and water that night. Panic erupted among the residents, who felt they were being abandoned. Han ignored the uproar, focused only on his watch. At precisely 4 p.m., sirens blared outside, announcing the implementation of a state of emergency, ordering all residents to remain indoors. Everyone realized the situation outside the complex was also dire. Han explained the power outage was due to infected individuals at the power company. Hioju went to the rooftop to find Han, asking his ultimate reason for coming to the complex. This time, Han didn't hide his intentions. He wanted to take Hioju back to the research base but needed final confirmation. He drew his gun and opened a hallway door. A frenzied infected individual suddenly rushed out. As Hioju fell to the ground, Han shot the infected, saving her in the nick of time. Later, Hayang Sik and his co-worker discovered the infected body was missing from the gym. Reviewing the security footage, they saw biohazard soldiers decapitating the corpse. Recalling Han's earlier mention of viral antibodies existing in the brain, Hayang Sik instantly guessed Han's objective. He raced to the rooftop to save Hioju, but he was too late. Han had already taken the unconscious Hioju down the elevator. Hayang Sik's co-worker, standing at the elevator doors, could only watch helplessly. Learning of Hioju's abduction, Hayang Sik immediately pursued Han. Seeing the vehicle about to leave the complex, Hayang Sik didn't give up. Instead, he seized the brief moment when the vehicle was passing through the checkpoint, jumping onto it. He pointed his gun at Han, ignoring the approaching soldiers. Han attempted to grab his own weapon, but Hioju, in the back seat, suddenly awoke and seized the gun first. Han was astonished, having just injected her with enough tranquilizer to sedate an elephant. He asked Hioju what it would take for her to cooperate with the testing. Hioju hadn't anticipated this request. She readily agreed to have her blood drawn, believing it could help develop a cure. Hayang Sik, still confused about Han's motives, questioned whether he intended to dissect Hioju's brain. Han clarified that he only dissected the brains of deceased infected individuals to test for antibodies. Hioju was different. Her blood contained the novel antibodies. A small sample was enough to create an effective treatment. He had to keep this a secret because powerful people, aware of Hioju's life-saving blood, would surely drain her dry. Hearing this, Hayang Sik felt relieved. Hyasu also felt that Han wasn't heartless. During the earlier incident, he hadn't immediately killed the infected but let it pass before tranquilizing Hioju. Han later understood why Hioju had regained consciousness so quickly despite the tranquilizer. The mutated virus resided in her brain, giving her the same rapid recovery abilities as the infected. This was a typical symptom of antibody production. She received a call from her brother. Fortunately, he wasn't dead, just bitten. Afraid to seek out Hivon, he'd hidden in the basement, staying put. Mid-conversation, the screen went dark, followed by the lights in a series of buildings blinking out. The city-wide blackout had finally begun. However, Hioju and Hayang Sik, along with a few others, were unaffected by the power outage. They happily ate ramen. Those with light in their hearts never fear the dark. Hayang Sik predicted heavy rain and took Hioju to the roof early to arrange containers. Curious, Hioju questioned how he knew it would rain at midnight with the current clear skies. Suddenly, Hioju sat up. Just as Hayang Sik predicted, it was pouring outside. Hiosu tried to set up more containers but startled his co-worker, who was talking in his sleep and clutching a cross. Hioju was curious. Since when had her co-worker become religious? While Hayang Sik seemed to understand, the other sleepless resident trembled, possibly from guilt. Hivon went to the first-floor lounge alone. Seeing her brother drinking rainwater outside, she hesitated, torn between inviting him in and fearing his infection. Early the next morning, Hioju and Hayang Sik collected water from the roof. They encountered the cleaning lady, who presented them with a blood-stained shirt found in the 4th floor hallway, possibly used by an infected person. The two immediately went to investigate the 4th floor, starting with Hivon's apartment. Hayang Sik directly asked her if the shirt was hers. Hivon vehemently denied it. However, this immediately made him wonder where Junju's brother had gone. When Hayang Sik and his co-worker checked the basement, they didn't find the brother but did discover a recently eaten lunchbox. Meanwhile, Hivon was seen carrying a basket full of supplies, sneaking them into a room on the 11th floor. As she exited, she bumped into Hioju and Hayang Sik. It turned out Junju had been followed. Left with no choice, Hivon confessed. Pitying her brother outside, she'd secretly quarantined him in the vacant apartment, usually managed by the cleaning couple. When Hayang Sik asked Hivon's brother if the lunchbox in the basement was his, he confirmed it, adding it was given to him by the man with glasses. Hayang Sik didn't intend to evict Hivon's brother. The lockdown was lifting the next day, and he could simply be taken to a medical center then. Grateful, Hivon bowed repeatedly, much to the delight of the ever-helpful Hioju. The next day arrived. Residents found something odd. Wasn't this the day the lockdown lifted? Gathering in the gym for the expected meeting, they found bottles of clean drinking water with a note thanking them for their perseverance. Everyone looked delighted, but things weren't as they seemed. The water had been placed there days earlier by the man with glasses. He'd learned from the infected man in the gym zombie, that he himself was infected after taking the same tainted water. He'd then maliciously contaminated the rest, now offering it to everyone. He wanted everyone in the building infected so no one would investigate his crime of inadvertently spreading the virus. Truly, some ordinary people can be more terrifying than the infected. Seeing Hayang sick hadn't taken any water, the man with glasses offered him a bottle, raising Hayang sick's suspicions. At that moment, Hioju asked if anyone wanted to go outside with her. Met with silence, only Hayang sick, her errand-running partner, joined her to scout the lobby. Hioju reached for a bottle of water, but the cautious Hayang sick stopped her, asking, "What if someone put something in it?" The two reached the complex gate, only to find it locked. As they stood puzzled, the piercing alarm blared again, announcing the indefinite postponement of the lockdown lift. Panic spread among the residents. Leaving the apartment, Hayang sick and Hioju ran into their coworker, who was on his way to pray. The building representative's husband was a pastor, and since the zombie encounter, the coworker had become withdrawn, finding solace only in prayer. The next morning, the man with glasses approached the building representative, claiming a significant discovery. They hurried to the 11th floor room where the infected individual was hiding. It turned out he'd witnessed Hivon bringing her brother in a few nights prior, having hidden and observed the entire scene. The building representative, upon seeing the scene inside the room, screamed in terror. On the rooftop, Hioju and Hayang sick tried contacting someone via walkie-talkie without success. The building representative and the man with glasses arrived, accusing them of hiding an infected person. Unable to defend themselves, Hayang sick could only handcuff Hivon's brother in the gym. But the story wasn't over. Suspecting the man with glasses was scheming, Hayang sick confronted him back in the apartment, demanding an explanation. The man with glasses feigned concern for the residents' safety, questioning if anything was wrong with his actions. He then turned the tables, insinuating that Hayang sick and Hioju, having been in close contact with the infected, might also be infected. To prove their innocence, he demanded they drink the beverages on the table. Hioju, refusing to be a victim, insisted the man with glasses drink as well. Noticing his overconfidence, Hayang sick switched their drinks. All three took a large gulp. The man with glasses dropped the act, rushing to the bathroom to vomit. He then triumphantly produced a zombie virus pill, informing Hioju and Hayang sick they just consumed the tainted beverage. He confessed to contaminating the drinks distributed to the residents earlier. He told them to go home and await their transformation. At this point, Hayang sick picked up the zombie virus pill and confidently swallowed it. He'd been suspicious of the man with glasses for a while, finding the pills and replacing them with placebos. Seeing his plan fail, the man with glasses attempted to escape, but Hayang sick apprehended him. As they prepared to take him away, they found their coworker at the door, holding a gun. He intended to quarantine Hioju and Hayang sick, having been deceived by the building representative into believing they were infected and feigning normalcy. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Han received news from the research center. They had developed an effective treatment with promising test results. Patients no longer experienced excessive thirst, but there was a strange side effect. The previously vegetarian test subject now craved meat. Han reported this to his superiors, continuing to conceal Hioju's antibody research. Upon receiving this good news, the high-ranking officials became the first to receive the treatment. Their condition improved, but they instructed Han to delay public release until the infected population decreased, claiming it would save resources. Han smirked. He said, "People who are truly problematic should disappear as soon as possible, like you." He then brutally assaulted a guard, leaving him severely injured. The officials, witnessing the bleeding guard, lost control, driven by a sudden, ravenous hunger for human flesh. It turned out Han knew about the treatment's flaws all along. He'd intentionally exaggerated its effectiveness, enticing the corrupt officials to use their privilege to receive it first, both to test its effects and eliminate those harmful to the public. These officials were now nothing more than test subjects for Han to manipulate a classic case of killing two birds with one stone. To discredit Hioju, building representative Hayang spread rumors that Hioju had been bitten by a zombie. Suspecting she might be hiding her infected status, Hayang led the residents to Hioju's apartment, hoping to find incriminating evidence. Hioju was disgusted by Hae-sun, but even more disappointed by her co-worker's easy betrayal. The audacious man with glasses even searched Hioju's bedroom drawers. Hayang immediately confronted him. He was looking for the zombie virus pills. Was he planning to infect someone else? This time, the man with glasses gave an even stranger explanation, claiming he wanted to take the pills himself to prevent being killed by the infected. Hayang was speechless. Now, they couldn't distinguish the hidden infected among them. Every resident felt threatened. Tired of the suspicion, Hioju decided to conduct a test in front of everyone to identify the infected. She knew that the infected craved not just water but fresh blood. She prepared to prick her finger. Suddenly, Hayang rushed forward, seizing the fruit knife from her hand and cutting his own palm. Fresh blood flowed freely. As he moved among the residents, passing by a woman named Thurengan, she suddenly transformed into a zombie and lunged at him. Hioju instantly used her jacket to choke the zombie. Hayang seized the opportunity to help restrain her with Hioju until they managed to confine her in the gym. Only then did Hayang breathe a sigh of relief. Hioju asked Thurengan if she had taken the pills. She confessed that she hadn't. She'd been bitten at the supermarket earlier, but kept it hidden, fearing ostracization. Unexpectedly, their co-worker informed Hioju of a commotion in the golf room. The pastor, Hae-sun's husband, had been found playing golf there. Incredibly, he hadn't been present during the recent blood test. Shortly after, the pastor returned home, noticing the bloodstains on the floor. A strange scene unfolded. As he reached for a tissue to clean the blood, a powerful craving overwhelmed him. He almost succumbed to the urge to kneel and lick the floor, but managed to restrain himself. Waiting until his wife left, he noticed more bloodstains on the wall. He drank water to suppress his craving for blood, then saw the blood-soaked tissues in the trash can. At that moment, his wife returned, surprisingly carrying a glass of blood, a timely, albeit disturbing, offering. Meanwhile, Hayang learned from his co-worker that the infected hadn't attacked the pastor during the earlier incident, nor had the pastor attended the blood test. He shared his theory with Hioju. Perhaps the zombies shared a blood bond and wouldn't attack each other. Suspecting something was wrong with the pastor, they rushed to his apartment, only to be told by Hae-sun that her husband wasn't home. At this moment, the resident of the 6th floor, a bespectacled man, happened to see someone leaning against the wall. Unexpectedly, it was a zombie with pale white eyes. Terrified, the bespectacled man ran back to his apartment, ignoring the lawyer next to him who was getting dressed, and locked himself inside. Luckily, the female lead, Hioju, arrived just in time and tried to restrain the zombie. However, the zombie proved to be a formidable opponent, even knocking down the Hill duo. Just as the zombie was about to bite, Hayang arrived. He immediately removed his bandages, allowing his wound to bleed again, instantly attracting the zombie. This gave Hioju a chance to recover, and she immediately teamed up with Hayang to subdue the zombie. They planned to clean up a bit and wait for the pastor to regain consciousness. However, when they returned, the pastor was gone. Looking through the open window, Hayang discovered that the pastor had fallen from the building and died. Hayang went to the bespectacled man's apartment, suspecting him of foul play. However, the man denied everything. In truth, Hayang's suspicions were correct. While the pastor, still in a zombie state, was leaning against the wall, someone had pulled him up by the head. He then saw a figure in the distance and lunged towards it, only to plunge into the air and fall to the ground below. That figure was the bespectacled man, whose motive was to frame Hayang, driven by a vengeful madness. The next morning, someone knocked on their door. It turned out the area had been quarantined for 8 days, and the residents were running out of water. Hayang knew the resident on the 15th floor had stockpiled supplies, so she went to him, hoping he would share some water. He was hesitant, saying he would think about it for a day before giving an answer. Hioju wanted to express her gratitude, but Hayang suddenly became apprehensive. He was still wary of this man, who had purchased the zombie virus medication. Meanwhile, at the research center, Lieutenant Colonel Ha received a report that a new variant of the zombie virus had emerged. One of the executives who took the new drug was infected with this variant. He was able to suppress his thirst, making him harder to detect. Lieutenant Colonel Ha planned to use him as a lab rat. A public announcement of the executive's sudden death was released, and even a funeral was held. Lieutenant Colonel Ha harbored deep resentment towards him, not only for his selfishness and greed, but also because the executive had bitten and infected his pregnant wife. Now, his wife was strapped to a hospital bed. With the due date approaching, Lieutenant Colonel Ha faced the agonizing dilemma of whether or not to let the pregnancy continue, knowing that any surgery or medical intervention before curing his wife's condition could severely harm her. At this moment, his assistant reported that Hioju's blood analysis report was out, showing that she possessed antibodies. This timely news brought Lieutenant Colonel Ha immense relief, almost to the point of tears. At the same time, Hayang, sick, alone in the bathroom, looked in the mirror, pulled down his collar, and revealed a wound. It was a lingering injury from his fight with the infected pastor. Just then, Lieutenant Colonel Ha called from the Virus Research Center. Hayang, sick, asked hopefully if Hioju's blood contained antibodies, but the lieutenant colonel lied, saying it didn't. Out of compassion, he said he would take the little girl, Ion, out of the quarantine zone. Hesitantly, Hayang, sick, asked Lieutenant Colonel Ha to take Hioju as well, knowing full well he would turn into a zombie someday. To protect Hioju, he had to get her away from him as soon as possible. Hioju was completely unaware of Hayang, sick's deliberate distancing. Instead, she hurriedly pulled him to the 15th floor man's apartment because the man had disappeared without a word, leaving only a note saying he had made an irreparable mistake and was going out to seek help. Hioju found it hard to believe the handwriting on the note belonged to the 15th floor man. Hayang, sick, also felt something was amiss, especially with the conspicuous lime powder on the floor. Hioju believed the veteran wouldn't leave so easily and must be held captive somewhere. Hayang, sick, disagreed, thinking the man had likely discovered his own infection and fled. Back home, Hayang, sick, stared at a glass of clear water. Wanting to delay the virus's progression, he resisted drinking it. His heart ached with a mixture of regret and worry, as fond memories of moving into their new apartment flooded his mind. He knew those days would never return. They went to the 11th floor to search for the missing man. Hayang, sick, immediately noticed the 15th floor man's water glass. Just then, they heard gasping sounds coming from a bedroom. Hioju reacted instantly, banging on the door in anger. The door quickly opened, revealing the disheveled lawyer and doctor's assistant. The lawyer stammered a pale excuse about providing legal counsel. When Hayang, sick, asked about the water glass, they denied bringing it. Hioju, realizing someone else had been there, searched the rooms. She quickly made a gruesome discovery. A human figure wrapped in rags stood motionless in a corner. To their horror, it was a corpse. Wasn't that the cleaning lady? Hayang, sick, noticing the body was covered in a layer of what looked like powdered stone, immediately called the only doctor in the building, the bespectacled man, to examine the body. Pressured by Hioju, the terrified man reluctantly agreed. He managed to determine the body had been dead for over 2 days, and the smell had been masked by the lime powder. Back in their apartment, Hayang, sick, suspected the 15th floor man was the killer, remembering the bag of lime powder in his apartment. Just then, a colleague arrived, asking for water. Hioju noticed Hayang, sick, deliberately turned his head away from the offered glass. The colleague mentioned that residents in other apartments suspected the 15th floor man of murder. Upon hearing this, Hioju and Hayang, sick, rushed upstairs. Knowing they couldn't stop the others, they tried to persuade them to form an orderly line instead of fighting over the supplies. The 15th floor man's apartment was quickly ransacked. After leaving, Hayang, sick, and Hioju went to the gym. Miss Hae-sun felt their previous infection checks had been inadequate, leading to deaths. She decided to conduct another blood test. When Hayang, sick, heard the words fresh blood, he felt a sudden, intense thirst. After regaining control, he quickly changed the subject. He wanted to activate the building's backup generator with Hioju to restore power and water. He also planned to use this opportunity to help Hioju escape. However, they knew restarting the generator would attract zombies. Hayang, sick, would be trapped, potentially facing zombies attacking the glass. If the zombies breached the building, their plan would fail. Hayang, sick, devised an alternate plan, access the electrical distribution room from the rooftop hallway, pointing out his quickly healing wound and his avoidance of water. Hayang, sick, immediately unwrapped his bandage, showing her the wound hadn't healed and claiming it was a self-inflicted cut from the previous night. Hioju, relieved and convinced, believed him. As long as he wasn't infected, everything would be alright. She then contacted Lieutenant Colonel Ha through the intercom, requesting more antibacterial medication. Lieutenant Colonel Ha helped them investigate, and they discovered the 15th floor man, whom they thought had left, was likely still in the building, possibly turned into a zombie. They decided to check his apartment, as he had told Hioju about a hidden safe room inside. However, upon arriving, they found the masked man was also missing. Just then, Lieutenant Colonel Ha's assistant called. While checking resident information, he discovered the masked man's identity was fake. The real owner of that name had been dead for a while. Hioju was shocked. She then spotted the masked man's backpack nearby, containing multiple IDs, including the deceased cleaning ladies. The masked man was the real killer. At that moment, Hayang rushed back, saying he'd found the 15th floor man. He had smelled something strange upon leaving the apartment and traced the odor to the electrical room, where he found the man's corpse. Meanwhile, their colleague at home heard a knock. Seeing the lawyer, he let his guard down and opened the door, only to be violently attacked. It was undoubtedly the masked man. Hioju and Hayang, realizing the danger, raced back. They found their colleague lying motionless on the floor and the masked man holding Ion hostage. Hioju demanded to know who he was, and the masked man finally removed his mask, revealing a cold, youthful face. Hioju, enraged, let him leave with Ion, knowing their priority was tending to their colleague's serious abdominal wound. Seeing the blood, Hayang trembled, fighting back his thirst. He then rushed to the bathroom, contacted Lieutenant Colonel Ha via walkie-talkie to request more medicine, and informed him he would send Hioju out as agreed. The astute Hayang had deduced Hioju had antibodies, realizing Lieutenant Colonel Ha wouldn't be so concerned otherwise. The killer took Ion out of the apartment and handed her to the lawyer. The lawyer suddenly recognized him as a murderer wanted by the police before the outbreak, known for his brutal methods. The killer confirmed this, claiming he and the zombies were alike, lurking among the crowd, seeking victims. Hioju disagreed, arguing zombies were a disease, while he was simply insane. In fact, there was more than one deranged individual in the building. The bespectacled man was a prime example. His actions had facilitated the killer's crimes. A few days earlier, he had witnessed the masked man murdering the cleaning lady. To save himself, he quickly suggested hiding the body in the vacant 11th floor apartment. From then on, he became the killer's advisor. The 15th floor resident, with his ample supplies, became their next target. Following the bespectacled man's advice, the killer used the excuse that Hioju was injured and needed medicine to convince a resident to open his door, leading to the unfortunate demise of the man on the 15th floor. Emboldened by this success, the bespectacled man tried to persuade others to join his cause against Hayang and Hioju. Meanwhile, Hayang and Hioju were led to the fitness center where the killer coerced Hivon into making them restart the emergency power. Afterward, they were herded to the basement by a group of residents, preparing to head to the adjacent building to turn on the power. At this point, a young man offered to accompany Hayang. In truth, he knew that risking it was better than staying with the increasingly unhinged group. His real plan was to drive out of the quarantined area and escape the nightmare. When Hayang and Hioju paid him no mind, they continued to the electrical room. Everything went smoothly. They successfully restored the backup power. However, the loud noise from the machinery attracted unwanted attention zombies. The surrounding zombies, finally roused, began to converge on them. They immediately fled. As Hayang calmly pulled Hioju back the way they came, intending to reach the next building, he explained that the killer might have set a trap at the stairwell entrance. They could go up to the roof from their current location and then cross over to their own building via the connecting walkway. Looking at the mindless infected outside, remembering that he too might become one of them, Hayang couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. However, someone was even more despondent, the callous young man. He discovered his car wouldn't start. In mere moments, he was overwhelmed by a horde of zombies. Perhaps it was a fitting punishment for abandoning his parents and fleeing alone. On the top floor, in the elevator, the doors suddenly opened. Seeing the oblivious zombies outside poised to rush in, Hayang didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, using his body to block them from entering the elevator. Looking at Hayang-sik, unharmed by the attacks, and noticing the wound on his neck, Hioju instantly realized he had been infected. Nevertheless, she pulled him into the elevator just before the doors closed. Hayang-sik confessed that every time he saw Hioju, his heart raced and he felt thirsty. At this moment, Hioju finally acknowledged her own feelings. She said, "I love you," and embraced him tightly. They successfully traversed the connecting walkway and returned to their building. Many quarantined residents had gathered on the roof. Unlocking their handcuffs, Hioju and Hayang-sik decided to split up to rescue little Ion and their colleague. Hioju quickly reached the lawyer's apartment where Ion was being held, only to find the lawyer desperately knocking on the door from the outside. It turned out his wife, having discovered he helped the killer take hostages, was deeply disillusioned. She tricked him into stepping outside to retrieve something, then used the key fob to lock him out. When Hioju arrived, the wife was holding the lawyer at bay and readily released Ion. Meanwhile, Hayang-sik returned home to find Mrs. Hei's son moving his belongings. Suppressing his murderous urges, he shoved her into the bathroom and locked her inside. Soon, Hioju and Hayang-sik, along with several others, converged in the elevator. Before leaving, Hioju asked the lawyer's wife if she wanted to leave the apartment complex with them. To their surprise, she agreed without hesitation, deciding to part ways with her husband. The group decided to take the same route as before, planning to use the rooftop walkway to avoid the killer. But they were a step too late. The killer had already appeared. Hioju hadn't expected him to be so quick. In reality, the killer wasn't foolish. He had initially hidden in the stairwell after the power was restored. After waiting for a while without seeing anyone, he immediately sensed something was amiss. As he was about to take the elevator, he encountered the cleaning couple. The male cleaner, who had long disliked him, attempted a sneak attack. But the killer, a seasoned professional, easily dispatched the two without slowing his pursuit of Hioju's group. Just as he was feeling triumphant, Hayang-sik pulled a stun grenade from his backpack and threw it. The killer was momentarily incapacitated. Everyone quickly ran down the walkway, but Hayang-sik, bringing up the rear, was shot. Initially not intending to leave, after urging everyone else to escape quickly, Hayang-sik immediately turned back and locked the door. Hioju, looking at the people in need before her, decided she had to get them out first. Knowing Hioju had safely left, Hayang-sik was finally at peace. Completely unafraid of the killer's threats, he mustered all his strength to toss the keys outside. This act enraged the killer, who screamed for Hayang-sik to turn around, as he preferred to look his victims in the eye when he killed them. But when Hayang-sik did turn, he lunged forward and bit the killer hard on the neck. Meanwhile, the doctor's assistant was using a computer to access a bank account when the bespectacled man suddenly returned. Noticing her furtive behavior, he immediately suspected something was wrong. Checking the computer, he quickly grasped her intentions. It turned out she had been frequenting his apartment to steal his bank account information. Exposed, she had no choice but to attack, using a baseball bat to knock him unconscious. She then called the lawyer for help, hoping to decipher the account password together. During this, the bespectacled man regained consciousness and quickly took the zombie virus medication he'd found while clearing out Hayang-sik's belongings, unexpectedly proving useful. Elsewhere, in Hayang-sik's apartment, Mrs. Hei's son had successfully freed herself. Armed with a baseball bat, she confidently headed to the elevator. Having learned from the cleaning couple that the killer had gone to the roof, she pressed the rooftop button without hesitation, clearly heading towards a dangerous confrontation. At this time, Hioju and the others finally reached the basement. After successfully starting a vehicle, they were pursued by the infected but managed to escape the apartment complex with relative ease and eventually met Lieutenant Colonel Han at the gate. Hioju wanted to ask him for a gun to rescue Hayang-sik. However, without a word, he suddenly injected her with something. The others were also subdued by soldiers. When she awoke, she was in a research facility. She pleaded to return to the apartment complex to find Hayang-sik, but Lieutenant Colonel Han refused. Instead, he led her to his wife's hospital room. He revealed that higher-ups knew Hioju's blood contained antibodies that could cure the infection, and if she left the facility, she would be taken to a higher-level laboratory, possibly never to be seen again. Back in her room, Hioju opened the phone Lieutenant Colonel Han had given her. Inside was a video, a heartfelt confession of love from Hayang-sik. Watching it repeatedly, she finally broke down in tears. Lieutenant Colonel Han, having agreed to her request, was preparing to defy orders and return her to the apartment complex. Because the antibodies in Hioju's blood were decreasing, with only 2 doses of effective treatment left, he hesitated for a long time before giving her one and equipping her with a hazmat suit to evade soldiers. He injected the remaining dose into his wife in front of his superiors, unflinchingly facing the consequences. However, Hioju didn't keep the cure for Hayang sick. Instead, she injected Ion's mother. The medical assistants were confused. Hioju explained that she wasn't the only one with antibodies, and moreover, she had decided that no matter what became of Hayang sick, she would stay by his side. But if Ion lost her mother, she would have nothing left. Now aware of Hioju's escape, the research facility tightened security. A kind medical assistant gave Hioju her uniform, slightly increasing her chances of getting out. She then suggested Hioju needed a minor injury to deflect suspicion. Hioju understood immediately. After successfully escaping, she quickly got into the vehicle Lieutenant Colonel Han had prepared. The travel permit inside allowed her to bypass military blockades and finally return to the apartment complex. At this point, Ion and her infected older brother were in the basement, preparing to leave. To their surprise, they were met by Hioju knocking at the door from the outside. Rewinding to the day before, after Hayang sick transformed and brought down the killer, he quickly reverted to his normal state. Ignoring a trembling Mrs. Hae-sun, he returned to his apartment and immediately fell asleep, utterly exhausted. When he woke again, Hee-von and her brother were sitting beside him. Her brother kept complaining about Hayang sick's blood smelling unpleasant, a phenomenon of repulsion occurring only between infected individuals. The siblings had no malicious intent. They simply wanted to care for Hayang sick. At this point, Hayang sick remembered he didn't know if the killer was dead and needed to confirm. When the 3 reached the rooftop, they discovered the killer was gone. Now troubled, Hayang sick decided to check each apartment. Upon reaching the bespectacled man's apartment, the man immediately started screaming for help, claiming someone was trying to harm him. Earlier, the doctor's assistant and the lawyer had knocked him unconscious, hoping to extract his account password. Fearing for his life, the bespectacled man had quickly taken the virus medication. Shortly after, the cleaning couple arrived seeking help. They had been stabbed earlier by the killer and wanted the bespectacled man to treat them. The assistant, unwilling to let them in, lied and said he wasn't home. Unexpectedly, a bizarre incident unfolded. The bespectacled man, seemingly transformed after rising from the floor, bit the lawyer's hand. Terrified, the assistant fled without a second thought. The injured lawyer followed, opening the door and quickly retreating inside. Only the female cleaner realized the bespectacled man hadn't actually transformed. He had faked it. When Hayang sick entered, the cleaning couple were being treated inside. Seeing their blood-stained clothes, Hayang sick nearly succumbed to another frenzy, but his strong will held him back. He then warned the bespectacled man against further reckless actions, having realized earlier that he wasn't benevolent. He had only taken in the cleaning couple to ensure he had a source of blood if he transformed. Overhearing their conversation, the female cleaner produced some pills and told Hayang sick it was time he took the medication. She knew that now, the only way to save his life was to allow him to become infected so his wounds could heal rapidly. It was the only option she had. As they reached the stairwell, they encountered Mrs. Hae-sun, who now seemed delusional. Upon learning the killer was missing, she panicked and ran to the balcony to check, as she distinctly remembered killing him herself. Now completely convinced of his death, she stubbornly insisted Hayang sick must be hiding the body. Meanwhile, Hayang sick had reached the basement. He wanted to confirm whether the young blonde man had escaped. Seeing the blood-splattered car, he was surprised to find the young man still there. Although alive, his arm was badly bitten, and he was in a terrible state. But when he rang his apartment doorbell, his father, without reproach, rushed to let him in. This was truly a safe haven. On the other hand, after taking the virus medication, the male cleaner had significantly recovered from his wounds, so he took another pill. Now, with their lives seemingly secure, the greedy couple started plotting to take over the luxurious apartment before them. The bespectacled man, entering the room to check the cleaner's wounds, suddenly went berserk and tried to bite him. But the bespectacled man was too quick and escaped. He then encountered Hayang Sik and others in the hallway and started screaming for help again. Indeed, it takes a villain to catch a villain. In front of Hayang Sik, the female cleaner lied, claiming the bespectacled man had given her husband the zombie virus medication, causing him to go crazy, and proceeded to chase the bespectacled man out of the building. Convinced the bespectacled man was responsible, and to prevent him from harming anyone else, Hayang Sik handcuffed him in the gym. The happiest people at this point were undoubtedly the cleaning couple. They naively believed the bespectacled man's apartment, and everything in it, now belonged to them. Perhaps from overexcitement, the male cleaner decided to take another pill to calm his nerves. Judging by their expressions, they seemed to be sealing their own fate, as Hayang Sik and the others had checked every apartment and found no trace of the killer. Meanwhile, in the gym, the assistant tried to sneak away with the computer, but the bespectacled man caught her. As they argued, Mrs. Hay-sun appeared, wielding a dumbbell. She proposed collaborating with the bespectacled man to eliminate Hayang Sik. This way, no one would know about the bespectacled man's crimes, and she could avenge her husband's supposed death. She still believed Hayang Sik and Hioju were responsible, unaware the true killer stood right before her. They agreed to use the assistant as bait to lure Hayang Sik out. The bespectacled man then slashed the assistant's arm. Overwhelmed by the scent of blood, Hayang Sik rushed towards the gym, feeling himself on the verge of transforming. The pounding on the door intensified, and Hayang Sik's pupils began to turn white. Fortunately, at that moment, Hioju, having subdued Mrs. Hay-sun, arrived. She kicked open the door, knocking the bespectacled man aside. Approaching Hayang Sik, she gently and repeatedly soothed him, and miraculously, he returned to normal from the brink of a frenzied transformation. Overjoyed, Osu impulsively hugged Hayang Sik. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Colonel Han arrived at the complex with a large force. Based on the lawyer's wife's description, he was certain another antibody carrier was within the complex. At that moment, the blonde young man's family was happily watching TV when a team of biohazard soldiers burst in. The father, unafraid, even shouted, "We're saved!" Hivon's brother was also taken away. Examining his wound, Lieutenant Colonel Han confirmed he carried the antibodies. The least welcoming of the soldiers were the cleaning couple, as this meant their dreams of wealth were shattered. After Hioju and Hayang Sik locked the bespectacled man and Mrs. Hay-sun on the roof, Hayang Sik felt it was wrong for the 15th floor resident's body to remain outside and decided to bring him inside his apartment. As Hayang Sik opened the door, the killer, who had been missing all this time, appeared, gun in hand. When Hayang Sik naturally refused to comply, a struggle ensued. Hearing the gunshot, Hioju rushed over to find Hayang Sik shot and kneeling on the ground, the killer's gun still pointed at his head. In a daring move, she shot her own arm and offered the blood to the killer. Seeing this, the killer transformed into a frenzy and lunged at her. Another shot rang out, and the killer fell. Hayang Sik had fired. However, he then collapsed. Unable to accept this, Hioju held him tightly and wept inconsolably. The scene shifted to the bespectacled man and Mrs. Hay-sun standing trial, facing the consequences of their actions. Later, thanks to Hivon's brother, a specialized cure for the zombie virus was developed, healing a significant number of infected. The complex returned to its former vibrancy. Little Ion joyfully ran to Hioju, chattering excitedly. Then, Hayang Sik appeared. He hadn't died that day. They embraced, happily walking down the street.